This week we're doing a bit of a recap of the Pentateuch and then an introduction to the history books. So if you didn't get any reading done over the holidays, that's good because you didn't really have anything to do. There is a chapter on the history books in your textbook. I think I may have mentioned that, which is really helpful. But I think there's three things, but really one thing that I find really key as we move on into these history books that we need to have our head around to be able to have a good understanding of that context. And remember, we just bang on and on about context because it sort of largely dictates how it is that we understand many of the really curly narratives. But we're not going to do history books just yet. We're going to talk about our Old Testament knowledge and how it is that we can go from this big pile of dirty washing to a nice, neat, sort of categorised set of ideas and stories and concepts. And so the first exercise is to try and forget everything you already knew of God and just bring to mind the things that the Pentateuch revealed about God. What is it that was revealed about God over the last term? Reading through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. What were the things that were revealed about God in that time? Now that one, it's probably good to do it as a group. So if you want to find yourself, Alex and Irene, we're getting straight into some activities, and so get Studley on your table. There you go. So in your learning guide, it'll be, I think, almost on page 1. Probably will be page 1. There you go. Activity 1A. What has the Pentateuch revealed about God thus far? We've had 2 weeks off, so we'll have to really sort of delve back into the archives. But if you want to do maybe 5 minutes, see how much you can come up with. And if you can't come up with anything, ask the person sitting opposite you. Take it away. Okay, we're not done yet, but just so that I know we're all on the right track, I'm going to go to each table and just get one something from each table, and we'll start with the Jacobs and the Berries.
One thing that stood out to me that I didn't really know before was that when he had got his chosen people out of Egypt, that he wasn't just rescuing some people and taking places, he was building a great nation and of the highest standards to be an incredible people to carry on through history and building all of that up. I didn't realise that before.
Okay, so that's something God did, and what does it reveal about God? Okay, good. All right. Good. Excellent. Bearded crew. Yeah, the bearded. Sorry.
He rises up one person. He chooses their singularity, like Moses, Abraham, Joshua, and chooses to change through them rather than
Okay, so
group of people.
So he works through individuals, maybe?
Yeah.
Something like that. Good. Okay, excellent. So that's something the Pentateuch reveals. Don't know what to call you guys, the pretty ladies.
Sovereign overall.
Okay, good. Yeah, what does sovereign mean? Has the ultimate say. Okay, that's a good aspect of sovereignty. Yep, that's good. In control of everything. That's another really good definition. That's good. Okay. Sorry, Dave. I know you felt left out. So the pretty ladies at the back as well. What have you got for me? What does the Pentateuch reveal about God?
I just get frustrated with how God had such patience with.
You got frustrated with how much patience God has.
With the whining Jews.
Go on, in Jews.
I just constantly complained and after all the things that happened that went down.
Okay, so God's patient. That's something that is revealed in the Pentateuch.
And he desires a relationship.
Ah, good. Okay, so that's sort of building on what Dave had to say about working through the individual. So what have we got? You got his strategic. Okay, so he's like got a brain, works through individuals and builds a relationship with them. He's sovereign in control of everything.
Holiness,
He's holy.
holiness, and his jealousy for his people.
Oh, he's jealous. Yeah. Okay. Good. See, the Pentateuch reveals lots of things about God. Good. Okay. The intelligent table. Yeah, you better come up with something good.
He keeps his promises even after the long time. He kept his promise.
That is a great one, Kelly. So that is a key concept. I mean, all of them are. All of these are key concepts. Yeah, nothing by chance, sovereignty and strategic, and loves people and wants to be with people and work through people, and all-knowing and all-powerful, the buck stops with him, and he keeps his promises. That, for the history books, if you can keep that at the forefront of your mind, it will make reading them make a lot more sense. Okay, the hipsters. There we go, good here. Sorry? Different.
All of the other unique gods.
Okay, unique. Yep, so the God of the Bible is very unique. One of a kind. Yep, good. And you guys look like a bag of smashed crabs, eh? So, the athletes. What do you got for us, Tony?
I reckon he's got a great sense of humour. He's compassionate, especially when he just wiped them out, but he listened to Moses. He's caring, he's unfailing, and strategic, understanding his way of his plan, his purpose.
Yeah. Okay. What's his sense of humour?
That's Leon and Sam was saying in the camp, the people he picks, like Moses can't speak, but he chooses.
Oh, yeah.
Choosing to be a spokesperson.
Yep. Yep, that's a good one.
And we look at it as sort of, like you just picture, hey, Jesus, come watch this one, and tell Moses to tell people.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you guys are in that headspace because I often conceptualize events in history and even creation, what was going on in conversation with God and Jesus before that. Like when we get to Song of Solomon, we'll have a conversation on that. Okay, cool. All right, so good. So the Pentateuch reveals all of these things about God. That's really good. What have we got by way of time? Did anyone feel like they got pulled up short? Are there other things that they wanted to talk their table about there? Cool. It'd be good, Numerics, to find a table where you can both be on the same, with other people. Yeah, cool. Sitting by yourself tonight will make it hard. All right, so the next activity then is what characters and events are used in the Pentateuch to reveal this. And so this should be pretty easy because I asked why is he strategic? Well, you've got an event to tie that revelation to. So what was one over here? Fee said it's personal. Well, what's an event? What's a story? What's a character that in the Pentateuch that's revealed that about God? Okay, go for it. And you can come up with other characteristics about God, other things that have been revealed, but I want you to try and tie it to actual circumstances. Okay. So let's see how we go. What have you guys got? Some characters, events that.
Well, some of the stuff that were revealed to God about God to us. So good sense of humour, Moses.
Yep.
Patience, Israelites, loving, Adam and Eve, creation, intricacy / strategic, and his plan, he's a good planner.
Okay. Yep. Maybe the tabernacle for plans, eh? All right, up the back. Every face on that table looked like what?
Like a whole institute shows that God is unique in that he exists as compared to the other gods which don't.
Okay. Yeah. You've made it. You've made it.
We had a couple ones just like with promise, so Abraham and Sarah promised children.
Great. They had kids.
They had kids.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yep. All right. Anything else?
When it speaks to Moses, like that there was his sovereignty and holiness in that knowing an equal God that Moses.
Yep. Great. This might be at the moment all sounding a little bit like yeah, obvious, but this is just. I will explain why we're doing this because it's so important that we do this. Okay, next table along.
So God reveals the plan of his redemption, particularly in the Garden of Eden, where he makes.
Okay, I agree that he does. But I'm not sure that would have been obvious to Adam and Eve. But yeah, that's not even fair. I'm just trying to screw down on you a little bit. Because I want really obvious, concrete examples of how God behaves and acts in history. So that we can draw a straight line from like that activity to what otherwise would just be an aphorism or something like God is good. Okay, great idea. What evidence do you have of that? Oh, here's an actual event that took place in history.
Or even just the fact that God, before Moses went back, God said, "I'll harden Pharaoh's heart, so I will show him my wonders and signs."
Yeah.
And then that's what happened. And God made a distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites.
Okay, good. All right, great. And there's the sovereignty thing there as well. Yeah, God's controller. Good. What do we got? Tyrrells?
God's protection, God's provision when it comes to the cloud by day and the fire by night,
Yep.
and the manna and the quail and the water out of the stone.
And he wanted to be with them, so he got them to make the tabernacle, so he could live with them, and the sacrificial system, so they could be clean enough to meet with him.
And let's talk about the sacrificial system for a moment. What else does the sacrificial system reveal about God?
He's holy. And without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness.
Okay, excellent. So holiness first, and it's like, well, how in the world can he be with? He was a personal God, isn't he? We've talked about that. He wants to be with his people, but then he's a holy God. So how can he be with his people? Because we know that unholiness and holiness can't coexist. What is unholy makes the holy unholy. You've got pure water and a jar of infected water. I don't know. You only got to put a little bit of the infected water in the pure water, and it's impure in both cups now, right? So then something needs to happen. A transaction needs to take place before. Okay, so that's revealing something pretty significant about God. Can't just waltz into God's presence. Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, ladies up front. Pippi made the mistake of looking me in the eye, and she quickly diverted.
I think like how it reveals that he's a teacher or educator, or I don't really know the word, but like when he comes to like how like 10 Commandments or all these like other really specific laws, like how he made them, like when I think about it, like when I was reading through it, like I was like, why did God like make all these like so specific laws? Like it's just so specific and like it sounds weird, like why? But then when you think about it, like God didn't make them if they didn't need them, like because they didn't know how to live and how to be like just people and like because before they came out from Egypt they were just slaves and their identity was like so much on that. Like they didn't know how to just live like people.
Yep.
And yeah, so like God kind of educated them and taught how to live through making these laws. So yeah.
Okay, so that is really good. I mean, these are all really helpful ideas that you see. What I find fascinating, and I never really thought much about this until recently, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's helpful, is when we say we believe in God, we have a concept of who and what God is that not everybody else has. And I'm not even speaking on the level of, well, there's a shopping aisle of gods and different people pick different gods. You know, some might have a Jewish perspective of God or an Islamic perspective of God. But I mean, even from within Christianity, different people have a different idea of who and what God is. And so when we talk about this, we're defining God's character and we're linking it to certain behaviours. And I think this is something that's helpful for us just in evaluating our own, or who we are as individuals, our own identity, trying to get to the bottom of our own identity. The best way to do it is to look at our behaviour. Yes, Glenn?
What did you say about studying government? You said like how would I be promoted?
Oh, yeah, just the Old Testament's hard to understand unless you really spend time on it, not just gloss over it.
Yep.
So I was thinking of what you said, like Christianity kind of has an idea of it, but unless you really do search it out, probably won't really. The more you search it out, the more you find it.
Yes. It's okay. So even just on that really remedial level. I was chatting to Gay before you guys got here, and she admitted, which was dangerous to do so in front of me, that she didn't know the difference between rugby league and rugby union, and that it all just looked like men with their head in a scrum to her. That was her words. And so Gay obviously has just never paid close attention to those sports. Yeah. So when I say footy, depending on, like, even just from within Australia, some completely backward-thinking people think that AFL is footy. So
Don't go down Victoria.
Okay, but that's a good example. I think that's a great analogy. Is like people have these things in their head, and so it's important for us to know, like, who are we talking about? What are we talking about? Is God a force? Is God personal? And we're developing ideas now about who and what God is, and something that describes the holy nature of God is God's law. And God revealed that to us. Pippi's telling us that God wants to teach us about Him. That's so for me, just even on the most fundamental level, that should caution anyone to assume anything about God. If God's going to teach you about Him, why should any of us think that we could just assume something about God? If the God of all creation is God, I'm going to need to tell you. I mean, on other levels, that starts to speak to the enormous gap between the Creator and the created thing. You know, like the created thing needs God to reveal Himself, because we are so, I don't know what the word is, but
Big God.
it's a big God and we're not. Yeah. Okay. It's the ontological gap, yes, but that will take defining terms. Yeah. Okay. You guys, what do you got?
We had that he's loving and just.
Okay, so you're still telling me about...
Yeah. And the example for that, well, there's a couple of examples, sort of change one which one I was going to give, but one, I think they're in Cage Barnea and there's the mutiny. He sends the snakes out to get everyone, so this, the justice for their disobedience is that. But he's loving in a way that he's making a way to get back to him with giving instructions to put the snake on the pole. They look at it, which is also a way to Jesus as well.
Okay, good. So God is a just God and a merciful God. Yes. and He's both. Some people like to talk about a just God, and some people like to talk about a merciful God, but we have a just God who can choose to show mercy. If you want, Rod, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and that reveals His plan of salvation throughout all these. So the shadows of time.
And remember, we're particularly helped in this case because of John 3:15, not John 3:16, which reminds us that just as the snake needed to be raised up in the wilderness. Yeah. So I mean, the Bible that goes, well, God goes to lengths through the Bible to help us with all these things. But I'm still just talking about events in history that reveal things about God. And we're almost there. What do you got at the end? I think that you're not telling me.
What she says when God negotiated, when Moses negotiated with God,
yeah.
Like it was like, they didn't argue, but it was like a friendship relationship. It wasn't just sort of, oh, this guy who was kind of having a battle.
Yeah.
That sort of explains the nature of God to us as humans. He's not far off.
And he listens to what we have to say as well. Because we could have just said to Moses, no, I'm doing what I want to do.
Okay, so now, why didn't he need to, given what other people have said about his nature already? Because I believe, you're absolutely right, he doesn't need to because of another aspect of his, came from this table here, it starts with S.
Sovereign.
Yeah, doesn't need to. So we're learning more about this God. He's capable of everything. He's so good and brilliant and bright that he could just make any choice he wanted and it would be right. And yet, he's willing to engage with his creation and partner with his creation and discuss stuff with his creation. Okay, this is all stuff in our Pentateuch. And you gonna say something? Oh, yeah, Ron.
Said it's all great stuff.
Oh, it's all good. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. But it smells a lot like Jesus, doesn't it? I don't know. Well, to me it does. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, man, I'm learning all of these attributes of Jesus in the Pentateuch, but we don't know about Jesus yet because all we've read is the first 5 books of the Bible. And it's important that we understand that we're trying to at least do this activity at the moment with the first 5 books of the Bible because, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, something unique to Christianity, and look, it is present in Judaism, obviously, because what we're working with right now is kind of the foundational books of Judaism as well, and to a degree, Islam, but not to the extent that it does for the Jews and the Christians. God is, the way He chooses to reveal Himself is through concrete, literal, transactions that happen in time, at a particular place, with people. And the way we learn about God is this really normal, earthy, natural way that anyone learns about anything, is that we experience it. God is a God who engages with experiences, and He's not a concept. That's why it's important to do this activity breaking into 2. He's not just a good God, a loving God, a sovereign God. Because they're abstract ideas that anyone can make up if they want. Anyone can say, oh, my God is this, that, and the other thing. And you can come up with, really good philosophical or logical arguments as to why that's the case. But it'll all be hanging out up here, unhinged to anything that has actually taken place, anything tangible. Yet when we do this part of the activity and we remember the particular events that were documented in our scripture, we've got something to say. When somebody says, when somebody says God is a loving God, you can say, well, why? Or how would you know that? Because our God is a intervening God, and He intervenes in history, and He reveals things to us, in a way that you can't deny. It's not just a good idea that someone wrote down. Now, again, for those of us that have grown up in the church, we don't necessarily think like that because the Bible's been around forever, and it's always been a part of our life to a degree. And so, isn't it just the way God does things? Well, no, that's not just the way the gods for the rest of the world do things. This is a Christian idea. There was a Jewish Christian idea. Now, for us, we start to develop, and for the Jew for sure, but for the Christian with the New Testament, we start to develop a lot of these different ideas once we get to Jesus. And for us to be able to utilise these ideas well, like I said at the start of the course, I want us to try and get a bit of a framework to be able to hang these particular events on, so that we can go back and reference them in our own archives, up in our head. So the next activity will be to get these particular events and characters that have revealed certain aspects about God, just the ones you've got on your piece of paper, so you don't need to do everything, and just see if you can't order them chronologically, the different things that God revealed about himself in a rough bit of a timeline. Does that make sense? Okay, go for it. Okay. So, all right, now, so apart from being able to just, I don't know, feel better about the fact that you can remember the order of particular events that take place throughout the Bible. Who was it now? I think it was Kelly. You talked about the promises. Yes. Okay. So what I want to do is the next exercise is going to be a big focus on promises, and there's a specific reason for this. Whenever we're talking about the broader context of a passage, to generalise, I'll often say, well, what's the major theme of the book? But there's a broader theme for the larger portions of books that are revealed by however it is that God has promised to relate to his people in that period of time. So an example would be, after Adam and Eve sinned, God said, we will be separated. And separated looks like death. And so from Genesis 3 all the way to basically the flood, every story that we read, the broader context reveals to us that, and that being what God had said to Adam and Eve and their descendants, by virtue of just saying it to Adam and Eve, that these events are to be understood in the light of the fact that these people are living independent from God, and death is starting to fill up the world. And that's what the stories reveal. So we shouldn't be surprised. Every story is just like, wow, things are getting worse and worse and worse. And so if someone was to just go and read, the story of Lamech or something and his two wives, and not have any previous understanding of the fact that God had said that, hey, and that was their first reading of the Bible, they'd be like, this is craziness. Who are these descendants of God's created people? They're just a mess. This must be a hopeless God or something. He doesn't know what he's doing. But we know, because God had said, hey, look, if you sin, that's a choice to live independently of me. So all of those stories need to be understood wearing, those glasses. Well, after Noah turns up, God makes another promise. And so the stories after that need to be read in the light of that promise. Then when we get to Abraham, there are some other promises. And I hope, as we've been walking through the content of each book, I've been trying to remind you guys of, hey, what is this story revealing about some of those promises? Okay, so that's kind of where we're up to now. Pull me up if I'm not making any sense. Jack, Activity 2 says, from Genesis 12 on, so that's from where Abraham turns up in the story, the Pentateuch is written in light of the promises made by God to Abraham. God promised to bless Abraham with many descendants, and they will become a nation, and have a land, and would be a blessing to the whole world. Okay? What are some of the key events that have seen this promise come into fruition? And what of these promises are yet to be fulfilled? Remember, we're reading from Genesis 12 on now with this set of glasses on. God's made some promises. This is what he wants to do with his people. All these stories in one way, shape or form are revealing to us how it is that God is fulfilling those promises. Otherwise, he's not a promise-keeping God, and Kelly was wrong. Okay? And because of this second part of the question, maybe God is wrong. Maybe God isn't a promise keeper. Because maybe there are some things that he promised that haven't happened yet. So, away you go. In light of those promises, so you might even have to ask around, what were those promises again? Or you could just go and check out Genesis 12, 1 to 3. 3 short verses. I apologise. Here, where it says what of these promises are yet to be fulfilled, I don't mean until like 2019. That was meant as far as we've read. So as far as we've read into the Pentateuch, what of these promises are yet to be fulfilled? My apologies. Everything we've done up until this point is meant to be in the context of what we have read, forgetting everything that we know of God. So, sorry. But anyway, it doesn't... Yeah, well, we'll see how we go. All right, we're going to start with you guys at the front. What have we got? What are some of the key events that have seen the promises come into fruition?
Well, we just found this, I thought it was cool and forgotten. Genesis 15.
Yes.
Saying, and as you read it, you're pretty much like, well, that happened and that happened and that happened and that.
What's something interesting in Genesis 15 in particular?
I feel like you're late for the right answer.
If you get it wrong, you'll have to leave.
Yes. There are a few answers.
I find the captivity one fascinating.
Just the wealth. I'm not only going to free you, but you're going to take so much with you. And that would have been hard for this to be.
Okay, so is everyone up to speed with what we're talking about here?
No.
Okay, so do you want to very quickly, chapter 15, we get God reiterating to Moses, Abraham, the promises again. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to promise you, but your descendants, they're going to fall into captivity for 400 years before any of that happens. But when you leave captivity, you'll be blessed abundantly. And what did we learn that happened to Abraham's grandson? What did he do? Yeah, okay, so that's fulfilling another blessing, that you would be a blessing to the nations. But Joseph finds himself down in Egypt, so he brings all his brothers down there, and then while they're in Egypt, what happens? Yeah, they're enslaved for 400 years. When they eventually get out, what happens? They take all of Egypt's gold with them. That happened like 500 years. God told Abraham this was going to happen. 500 years later, that's what happens. Yes. Yep. So God's going to judge those who keep you slaves. We find out that's exactly what it does to Egypt. And He's going to leave them enslaved. Why? And not take them to their promised land that He's promised. Did you hear that? God says, the reason why I'm not going to give you the promised land just yet is because I'm going to let the people in the land at least deserve the punishment that's coming to them. I'm going to let them stay there until the sin is so grotesque that you and me and every other sane-thinking person would think, you need to wipe these people out. Okay? Has that happened yet? Okay, well, that's because you've read ahead, but you haven't read ahead. You've just read the Pentateuch. So has that happened yet? No. Okay, but that's important, right? These are all these promises that we've got hanging, that are left hanging, and this is why it's so important to read the whole Bible, because we need to understand that, there is this book, even though there are divisions from within the particular books, it is one unified work that is heading somewhere, that is telling a story, that has a lead up to a climax, and it's a pretty good one. Okay, that's really good, Sarah Berry. Congratulations, you're not getting kicked out tonight. Okay, what have you guys got for us?
We had in the Genesis 15 as well, it talks about its descent to be as numerous as the stars.
Yes.
Up until just about where we are now, there's a couple million of them now.
Okay, so that's a fulfilled promise, would you call it? Yeah. Okay, all right. So the fact that we can assume that there's around about 2.5 million Egyptian Israelites, it looks like God has kept good on His promise that Abraham would have lots of descendants. At one point, that was looking a bit shaky, wasn't it? Because the one descendant that he had, God said, I want you to get rid of him. We'll sacrifice that one. Okay. What have you lovely ladies got for us?
In chapter 17, when God says, I'll make the Jews into a great nation, but then He also mentions about the king, there'll be a king out of this, kings out of this.
Okay, so fulfilled or not fulfilled?
So the king one is not fulfilled.
Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, Up the back.
He promised them land, but they haven't got it yet. Not until later.
Yeah.
But they did get it.
Yeah.
Not yet.
We don't know that yet. We haven't read that. Yes, no, that's right. Okay, they do own a little bit of land. Just does anyone know the tiny little bit of land that they do own?
There is too.
Oh, look at that! 10 points for the teacher's pet. Okay. What? He brought me an apple. Okay, in the back.
We have the same answer.
All the same answers.
But,
Okay.
there's a promise that God would never destroy the earth by a flood again.
Okay. Yep. That hasn't happened, which is good. So he's kept good on that promise. Yep. Okay. You guys, anything? Robbie, what do you got, Tom?
He's just pointed at the one who crushes the snake's head. That hasn't happened yet.
Okay, that hasn't happened yet. Yeah, that's a pretty obscure promise too, and it's something that we have the advantage of looking back on to be able to read into it. Look, to be perfectly fair, if I had read Genesis 3:15 and not known what Jesus did, I'd be confused. But that's a fulfilled promise for today. But again, it's unfulfilled at this point. No, but it's a great answer. It's a great answer because this is the start of like a promise that the Jews are still looking for. Right? So Isaiah really develops it for us. But they're looking for a man to rise up and redeem the world. That's what they're looking for. And so when we're reading all these Old Testament books, we should be looking for the same thing. Oh, must be Abraham. Wait, no, not him. Moses. Nope, not him either. Who have we got? Joshua. Maybe it's Joshua. He'll be the Savior. He's the one we're looking for. He's going to rise up. He's going to crush. That's how this is how we're reading it, right? For the first time, all of these promises, if we can try and keep these things in the forefront of our mind, it'll help us engage with this next set of stories. Because this next set of stories are fascinating for all types of reasons, but for us to be able to draw out what the authors are trying to communicate to us, we need to have a very good understanding of what it is that the book is, the storylines that are in the book so far. And you guys have just told me all about the different storylines. Some are fulfilled, some are yet to be fulfilled. They could make a good movie about this. Okay, alright, so we've done the Pentateuch, and we're now into what we call the history books. Now, much of what we call the history books, if we look over in the Jewish ordering of the books, they call them the Nevi'im or the prophets. Now, why would they call historical narrative prophets? Surely the prophetic books that are written with a prophetic genre, they should be called the prophets. I mean, that's what we've done down here. The reason why the history books for the Jews are considered prophets are because prophecy is not, remember, just the foretelling of some future event, but the foretelling of who and what God is. And what we've got here is a whole pile of history that reveals to us who and what God is. And so it's a prophetic set of stories that educates the reader and the whole world as to how it is that God operates in history. But if you're to read these books and not have read these ones, especially that one starting with D, we're not actually going to be able to get a clear picture of who God is. Remember the glasses that we were looking through when we were reading those top books? We're looking through glasses that are telling us about promises that are about to be fulfilled. Okay? But Deuteronomy sets up a whole new relationship. Well, really Exodus is the start of it, but Deuteronomy is where we get this knuckled down, drilled down. God says, hey, I've got a deal. I'll be your God, you be my people. Here's what that takes. And they all say, let's do it. There's a new promise made. There's a new covenant made. And that new covenant shapes how we read these stories. So we need to know what that covenant is, what the deal is. I mean, let's say you read something in 2 Kings and you learn about the fact that it might be Chronicles actually, is the story about women eating their babies, but in any event, whether it be the end of Chronicles or the end of Kings, we learn about Israel no longer actually being able to, exist, and then the tribe of Judah getting shipped off to Babylon. And it's like, well, how does this make any sense? Isn't this God that made all these promises that they're going to have a land and that the descendants are going to be more, numerous than the stars in the sky? How can any of that make any sense? This God doesn't keep his promises. You can tell me, because you've read Deuteronomy, how could that make sense? Having read Deuteronomy.
Because he told them exactly what would happen if they obeyed and exactly what would happen if they didn't.
This is it, right? And what do all these stories, not that one so much, but that one, but what do these stories here tell us about? Did Israel obey or disobey? Disobey. See how important it is to understand that broader context, that when we read these stories now, we don't read them with a Christian understanding of how we interact with God, but a covenantal understanding of how the Israelites were to relate to God. That's so important for us to be able to read these stories without getting confused. Okay, so the Pentateuch historically covers Israel's prehistory, Israel's family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then this confederation, like the loose conglomeration of the 12 tribes. And it's here at Joshua where the history books pick up and they tell the rest of the story into exile. So the confederation that moves into a nation, which is a fulfillment of one of those promises, way back up here in 2000 BC, and then finally the exile. Now, to read these historical books and to get the best out of them, there's three keys that I'm hoping we can blaze through in 25 minutes. All right, here we go. First of all, when we read history, again, as Western thinkers, we've got to do everything we can to try and accommodate for a different way of documenting history and a different purpose of documenting history for, well, not just the Bible, but certainly the Bible, but also for ancient Near Eastern cultures. And that they're not so concerned with a linear history. That means this event took place in 2013 and then the next event took place in 2014 and then 2015 and 16 and so on and so forth. But that they see things in blocks. Like here is a group of stories that communicate a theological truth that took place as historical events, absolutely. But we're not concerned about what order those historical events took place, and that's not the purpose of our history. The purpose of our history is trying to reveal a theological truth. You guys have been telling each other all about the different theological truths all night. Okay? Now, I've asked you to order them chronologically because it's helpful for us when it comes to trying to remember this particular story. Oh, that's right. There was a promise back then about God blessing his people. It's important for me to understand that story in that context. But now we've moved into a different portion of history. And so it is important to get a lineal understanding of history so that you can go, okay, when I'm reading these stories, I'm actually looking at it through the glasses of Mosaic covenant. Okay, blessings and curses. But where we see block logic becoming really helpful would be, say, for instance, the book of Judges. We get 12 judges, 6 major stories of 6 of those judges. And if you were to add up, because these particular stories give us a number of years that the Israelites were oppressed by a particular nation, and then the number of years of peace at the other end of that oppression. And that sort of cycle happens 6 times. And if you were to add up all those years, you've got about 400 or 500 years of time. But there's nothing in the way that the ancients told their history that suggests that you would have to back up each story from one end to the other. These stories could overlap because they're all stories communicating the same truth, which is, when we get there, we'll learn that God is very gracious to let people suffer because it causes them to repent, upon which he can send a Saviour and deliver them into some kind of peace. But we'll do that later. Okay, so the Israel's prehistory, we've got that promise from Noah. I'm not going to flood the world ever again. Okay, and we don't get a lot of narrative after Noah before we hit Abraham. But when we get Abraham, we've talked about the lens through which we're going to look at all the stories in the Pentateuch. Now we're here at this period of Israel moving into the promised land. We must do so with the understanding of God's promise, and that being the law. So now we've got the law glasses on. Every event that takes place is not so much to describe to us some moral truth that we can derive from a character of the Bible or an event in the Bible, but that looking through the lens of the law, we can see how God interacts with characters and events, so that the Bible reveals to us more about who God is. A simple preaching technique that I was taught a little while ago, which all of us preachers and teachers would do well to remember, is any text that you ever come across, the first question that you ask and the first truth that you should communicate is, what does this reveal about God? Then you can ask, well, what does this reveal about me? But we can't know what it reveals about us until we know what it reveals about God. And all too often we go to stories, say in David and Goliath. I've heard 1,000 messages preached on David and Goliath. And all of them are some moral story that you get from like the faith of David or something. Rather than the faithfulness of God. He made a deal, he made a covenant with Israel. And that was that if you obey me, this is what he says to not only Joshua but in Leviticus, if you obey me, one of you could go and chase 1,000 of your enemies. Yet you've got the whole army of Israel sitting, on the valley of Elah, freaking out, going, no, the Philistines are coming up. What are we going to do? And you'll remember David, he does the whole, we'll get this uncircumcised fellow out of here easy. Now, there's a reason why he calls him uncircumcised. It's because circumcision was a sign of the covenant. It was the sign of the law. And God's saying, if you're my people, you're circumcised. And my people obeying my law in my land, one of them will chase 1,000 of them. David knew that. So this is, the David and Goliath story is revealing a story about God. So a circumcised boy, he gets it. Doesn't matter how big the giant is, he's uncircumcised. God made a promise, keeps his promises. I'll get him out of here, no problems. Where's the rock? Okay, so see how with the right set of glasses on, we start to get God revealing himself. Okay, and these are promises that can be applied once we understand the meaning of the story in its context. Okay, finally, remember, okay, remembering that the historical cause and effect is largely seen in terms of the role of God and rather than the actions of people. So this is off the back of that previous truth. So we'll just recap very quickly. We've got to think of the books as theological rather than historical. How do we do that? We try and remove linear outline of theological events and we just see the groups of the stories and what do they reveal about God. Remember that the main focus of the literature is God and his covenant, not people and events. Again, so the David and Goliath analogy works well there. And then finally, remember that historical cause and effect is seen largely in terms of the role of God rather than the actions of men. And now this is where those who have got a bit of a bent toward a slightly more liberal understanding or a much more liberal understanding of how the Bible, the Old Testament in particular, works, they would say all of these stories are written by men and it's their best effort to use historical events to justify the existence of their God. And it's like men down here talking about him up there. But what an orthodox and more conservative picture of Scripture would reveal is that God has his hand in the creation of these stories, and it's him from the top down revealing to us through history who he is. And so when we keep that in the forefront of our mind, we can understand that every particular narrative event that happens in this next 12 books, I think it is, Is that many? 9 books. I don't know. I should know. Each one of these stories is going to educate us as to how it is that God is dealing with his people at that point in time. Now here's an important concept to get your head around. With the law glasses on, we need to remember that we've got a different set of glasses on as Christians right now. Okay? Now that doesn't mean that God is different now. I think I've used this analogy in the past, but I'll use it again because I think it's helpful. When Ava was a baby, let's go to. When Ava was a baby, I was like a rainbow parent. I just am going to bless you, look after you, keep you safe. That's it. I don't expect anything from you. Now, the exact same dad, 3 years later, says to the exact same child, listen, I want to bless you and I want to look after you, but there's a couple of things you need to learn about me and how it is that we relate together. One of those things is, I don't know, now you've got to wipe your own bottom. Okay? Now that makes perfect sense. Of course, she's getting to that age. Parents can't be doing that forever. Okay? If they did, there would be something wrong. Same dad, but there's a law in place. Now some people might look at that and go, look, God's different at different periods in history. No, he's not. He's revealing himself progressively. And again, this is important that we as Christians, we've got our head around this because we don't think about it often. But our concept of God, again, is not just a list of intelligent thoughts or aphorisms over here. It's concrete things that took place in history. And in the same way that you know things about your dad or your mum because you lived with them, this is how we know things about our God because we live with him. Now, as Ava gets to 12 or 13, I say, okay, now, you've gotten to the age where if you don't wipe your bottom, that's not a good example now, but like if you don't whatever, there'll be a punishment. There'll be something negative that happens. And that's the period of Israel's life that we're currently in. There's chapter 28 of Deuteronomy makes it really clear. If you do the right thing, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you. Like you won't understand how much I'm going to bless you. But if you do the wrong thing, there are going to be some dire, severe consequences. And so that's, again, we've got to keep in mind, we have, as a God's people, we've matured somewhat. And God has now got a slightly different deal going on. He's not a different God. But he foretold what would happen through the prophets of Ezekiel and Jeremiah, and that would be that at some point, you people will need to grow up. And there will be things that you will just know is right and you'll just know is wrong. In the same way that at some point I'll say to Ava, you're 21 now. Like, you don't have to, you should know how to behave. In fact, Jeremiah 33, 31 will tell you there's going to come a time where you won't need to go through other men, like priests or kings or prophets, to know about God and to know what to do. That'll be something that's on your heart. There's a new covenant, there's a new deal coming. And so you're not going to have to worry about this as much as you will how it is that you relate to God. And see, today I was telling Ava to clean up her room, but I also asked her to throw something in the bin. And she did the classic, she went off into the kitchen to throw something in the bin, and then she's having a drink of water at the fridge. I'm like, Ava, get in your room and clean it. She said, you told me to go into the kitchen to throw something into the bin. And that's what yeah, I did that as well. But you also know that you're meant to be cleaning your room. This is what the Jews are doing here. Oh, God, you said this, and God, you said that. And it's like, grow up! It's a different... Now, I'm the same dad. I've always been the same dad when I was the rainbow dad and when I was the blessing dad. And now I'm currently the law dad. And at some point, I hope to be the new covenant dad, Holy Spirit dad. There's enough of me in your heart now, Ava, go. Like, work it out. That's not... It's just helpful to get us into the frame of mind. We're going back to read about people who are currently law. So we've got to put those law lenses on. Is that helpful, you guys? Okay. Let me make sure. Okay. time. Perfect. It's never happened. Finishing early. Okay, this term, so I've received a fair bit of really helpful feedback. What you may or may not know, those that have done some tertiary education may have picked up on this. What I try and do in this class is something that people call flip learning. And it's like, I give you guys heaps of stuff to go and read, and to learn, and then we come to class, and then we talk about the problems that we've got with all the stuff that we've learned. Now, there's two reasons why it doesn't necessarily work straight away. First one is people are a bit shy, so they don't want to talk. And so I just assume then, all right, well, here are the things I struggle with, and I'm going to talk about them. And then we get to a point where some people start to feel a bit more comfortable about talking, and then we get into a situation where we've got a class where we are just dealing with people's problems, and when we were doing Pentateuch, the last couple of books, it got like that, which I think is great. But it necessitates that everybody has done all the work in the week leading up. Otherwise, there are people left going, I have no idea what we're talking about right now. And all I can do is say, for us to be able to keep moving forward and to keep this interesting, I just want to encourage you to do the work, prioritise the reading, so that when we come to class, I'm not rushing through half an hour of context, half an hour of content, half an hour of themes, knowing that we always get to about 3 minutes of themes. So that I can maybe assume a bit more that people have, they've done the reading, they've got the textbook sorted. You don't need to have had the textbook, mind you. If you've just read the book, you'll be sweet. And then that way it might be a little less problematic if we get stuck, bogged down talking about one specific issue, because we've all done the reading, so we're all sort of across it. Does that make sense? So let me encourage you. This is something that I would suggest. Always read the Bible first for yourself. Otherwise, you'll run the risk of listening to somebody else, picking up on the things that they've talked about, and then when you read the book, you'll only pick up on the things that the person that you heard talking about talked about, and you may miss other things. And all that's doing then is putting the responsibility of drawing out the themes of any one book on the teacher that you're sitting under, whether it be the guys from the Bible Project or David Pawson, or even myself, which would be terrible for you and for thee on Judgment Day. So, I also understand, though, that when reading these books, a lot of it is confusing. So as a happy medium, this isn't a long-term solve, this is a short-term solve for this year only. Listen to the Bible Project, watch the Bible Project video, it's really short, and as best they can, I think they don't try and peddle an agenda. Then read the book. Then if you've got time, go to the textbook. And I think the textbook is super helpful. But it is harder for a textbook to present all the different potential interpretations of a particular book. And so they've got to make a decision, and they make a pretty consistent decision the whole way along. And it's one I like, and I would hope that everybody else likes as well. But that's not my job. My job is to allow you and the Holy Spirit to work this stuff out. So, can I encourage you guys? Start to a new term. Let's prioritise. Just half an hour a day to get through the reading. These books are so much shorter than the Old Testament books. They're a lot more intriguing too. And in that way, when we get together, we can really just nut out some of the problem stuff. Does that sound good? If it doesn't, send me an email and I'll say, oh, that's sorry. It's the decision I made. Okay. What's this? Open group. Oh, yes, right. This is the other thing. This actually came from Tambury Mountain. I think this would be really helpful. Come prepared. So I know people don't like sharing in front of everybody. Come prepared every week to be able to at least discuss right off the bat with your table something that surprised you, something you'd never seen before, something that you've seen 1,000 times and you really love. Just something that will generate a little bit of conversation. It might just be the problem thing that you've got. And then as a way of working through the different problems with this flipped learning style, we'll see how we go, we might, per table, decide on, okay, what's the most important thing that we've discussed? That's the thing that we're going to try and talk about tonight. Cool? Alright. If you've not got the cluster 3A in the black text, cluster 3A, if you've not got that, make sure you don't leave without one. For those of you that bought the folder, I have a laminated map for you to take from the sign-on table. For those that didn't buy the folder, you don't get a laminated map because I've got to have some incentive for people to buy the folder. But you could purchase one. It costs about $1.20 to make them. And Andrew Grant, again from CYC, he is the one providing all of that. So I'll pass any money on to him if you want to do that. Otherwise, if you've got a folder, this is free. If you don't, you can make a gold coin donation in the pen jar up on the back table. And I'll see you all next Monday.
Joey.